welcome to You Didn't Get the Memo. I'm your host, Gloria Bailey Ray. And as always, we have an exciting show for you today. I want to thank you so much for tuning in and for joining us. Want to remind all of you that You Didn't Get the Memo is about providing you, the viewer, with relevant, factual, mainstream information to help you be informed and to make informed decisions. For those of you that may have questions for my guests, feel free to place them in the comment section. We'll do our very best to respond to them. Okay? So, also, You Didn't Get the Memo. We are airing live on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. If you haven't had an opportunity to tune in, look, I want you to set that dial to every Tuesday, 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, to tune into 55 minutes of some riveting, educational, informational, and motivational talks with my different guests. All right. Listen, companies around the country, they found themselves at the forefront of having to reevaluate their corporate views on race and ethnicity. Despite decades of efforts by public, private, and social sector organizations, racial inequity has only increased. Can this trend be reversed? That actually becomes the question. Since the murder of George Floyd back in May of 2020, companies have dedicated something around $200 billion to increase efforts towards racial justice. Listen, my guest today, Miss Odelia Young, who is one of the co-founders of Novalia Collective, is going to be discussing how her company, Novalia Collective, can assist companies with addressing the inequities in systems and environments. So I'd like to welcome to the show Miss Odelia. Welcome. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I always like to jump in and have my guests tell our viewers, first of all, a little bit about who you are. So, what's your backstory? And let's start with that, first of all.
Yeah, my backstory, big question. So my name's Odelia. I'm based in Oakland, California. I've been living in the Bay for almost 6 years. But I was born in the West Indies, tiny island of Grenada, was raised in a tiny 600-person rural town in central Indiana. Went off to the East Coast for college, lived in Ghana and Miami and the UK, working on children's rights, teaching, community development, activism work, and now I'm out here in the Bay, building and still doing community building and bringing people together around good stories and building communities of belonging.
Oh, awesome. Grenada. What a beautiful country. So, welcome. Well, you're co-founder of Novalia Collective. So, first of all, tell our viewers, what is Novalia Collective and why does it even exist?
Yeah, so my other co-founder, Vina Vo, and myself, so we founded Navali Collective at the end of 2018. It is a consulting firm that works on using creativity and storytelling to help people in terms of their strategic planning, facilitation, program design, all with the mission and goal of building more communities of belonging. So it exists because when Vina and I met, we came together over stories. And, you know, we're both we call ourselves children of the migrations and of the margins. And we found the stories really brought us together, though we have vastly different backgrounds. And we found that there's a power in story to really cut through all the other stuff. Like all the things we're talking about, you know, people try and put like numbers and figures to, and all of that is important. But at the heart of the work we're trying to do to create a better society are people. And people are comprised of their stories. And so that drew us together, and we wanted to do that for other people. So we started traveling together and listening to other people's stories. And we thought, like, this is the crux of what we need to be doing more to create better communities, whether they're teams, organizations, companies, or communities. And so we brought our talents together and started doing this work. And that passion really drives us because as two women of color, we know what it feels like to not belong. And we want to slice through that feeling so that other people of color can exist in spaces without fear of being who they want to be and fear of being vanquished.
Yeah, it's interesting that you talk about how you and your co-partner, how you guys founded Novalia Collective, and as we know, people of color, it's still this whole issue when you're working in corporate America, no matter how large or how small the firm is, there's still this conversation that needs to take place around race, around ethnicity, and that sense of belonging. And so when you talk about what led the two of you to develop Novalia, I think that in itself, that's a big piece of it, and that's a lot of work, though, Adelia. Um, when I think about that, that's an awful lot of work because coming into an organization and just trying to help people drill down, because it's interesting. What I found is a lot of time companies aren't able to really see the big picture, right? They see the picture that they know, but what is that overarching picture when you actually have a diverse workforce? So when we talk about it, what's the goal or the mission of Novalia Collective?
Yeah, the mission is to be able to come in and help people like re-see things. So the name Navalia actually comes from an old English word which means to reclaim land and to cultivate it anew. And we love that because when we're coming in, we're not like giving people a bunch of things. We don't think that we have all the answers and the solutions, but we're helping organizations and teams and communities see something differently because what we love about our work is we deeply believe in radical imagination. So, how are we thinking about something that's never existed before? And how do we envision that? And then take that vision back to the present to inform our steps to do something different. Because we spend so much time thinking about what we don't want that we don't spend enough time thinking about what we do want. And what our mission is to help people take that pause and say, if this is where we want to go, these are the things that we need to do to authentically be able to get there and to build something differently that works for more than just a handful of people.
Wow, very, very interesting. And the work that you guys are doing is so needed. I mean, so one of the things I want to just shout out to all of you who have companies and you've got employees. Listen, you want to tune in and reach out to Novalia Collective because the work that they're doing is the work that I think sometimes people find themselves in the crosshairs of, oh my goodness, I didn't think about this. And I love the way you said this. So many times people are thinking about what they don't want, that they don't take the time to focus on what they do want. And that's actually a critical piece right there when you really think about how do I want this company to look? What do I want? And to me, I totally love being in an all inclusive environment where I don't have to worry about if my dress attire, I need to dress more corporate to fit in when that isn't, um, you know, the culture that I was raised in. I want to be my authentic self. And sometimes I know that people in certain organizations just have a problem with that. So hearing you talk about that, I think that's really important. So this is a big question. And I'm going to ask you to think about it. We'll take a quick break, but I want to get into us talking about marginalized communities. Who falls into this category, and how does your company help corporations in this area? So, don't go anywhere, you guys. I'm talking with Miss Odelia Young, who's co-founder of Navalia Collective. And I'm telling you, by the time this interview is over, she's going to be able to help your company. So we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. Don't go anywhere.
Severe weather can strike anytime, anywhere, but there's a simple way to stay safe. Hey, Jim Cantori here. I stay safe in dangerous weather by planning ahead. You can stay safe too with a few easy steps. Build an inexpensive kit with supplies for your family's needs. Write down important information like phone numbers and medications. Always talk with your family and remember any pets in your planning. Be ready, be safe. Start your plan today at ready.gov/plan.
My uncle, Freddie Lee Tyson, was a part of the syphilis study. He was such a wonderful man, a very loving, very caring, very jovial person. He helped build the air base at Moulton Field. When you think about the Tuskegee Airmen, all of the greatness that they did, and then in this same space, such an atrocious study was being heaped upon our men, that really shook my spirit. They were not being treated. That is very different from what's happening with COVID-19. The vaccine is being made available to anyone who wants it, even those who find themselves at the space of hesitancy. We have to have patience and give them the requisite information that they need, that they can make an informed decision. But let's do it out of love.
All right, and if you guys are just tuning in, I have with me my guest, Miss Odelia Young, who is a co-founder of Novalia Collective. And her organization is basically, they're creating this space. They are dealing with some tough issues. And before we went to break, I asked the question, let's talk about marginalized community. We hear that word, it's been tossed around and different things. But my question to my guest is, let's talk about it. Who falls into this category, and how does your company help corporations in this particular area?
Yeah, when we're talking about marginalized communities, we're talking about historically excluded communities. And, we do a lot of work in the US, but also outside the US. And we know that might look different. But, we're talking about the US that's, often Black communities, Latino communities, communities, with people who are facing disabilities. So anyone who's been historically excluded from like the mainstream work. But I also want to just make a point that when we're talking about marginalized communities, we're talking about like what the dangers we face by being on the margins. But I also want to note that, Black people and many people of color, we've been living on the margins for many years and have grown very powerful in those margins as well in our own ways. Bell Hooks has a piece about the margins as a site of power. And what the problem is, as we grow rich and we support each other in these margins, as we try to move outside the margins, because we live in a world in which we need to navigate dangers abound. And so when we say that, one of the pillars of our work is that we are supporting and uplifting and making room for the voices of marginalized communities, these are the communities we're talking about, the ones that are historically excluded and the ones who, there's been laws and practices and policies to basically extinguish in the places that they exist.
Wow. I love the way that you say that. And I guess I never given thought to that, Odelia, how even if you're on the margin, how people have grown to be more powerful, which in many ways that can also be very disconcerting to certain people.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's also learning to navigate and to deal in that arena as well. But it's interesting as you're having conversations with prospective clients. Have you developed some type of radar or that sixth sense, or when a company is really taking these issues that they have you and your partner come in and deal with, are they taking these issues seriously enough? What is that actually resonates with you to say, okay, they're ready. They really need us. They need our help, and we feel that we can have an impact here.
Yeah, it's a great question. There are three types of companies I think come to us, or groups. One is someone who just wants us to walk in the door and see the table. So those are the ones who are they want to say that they're working with Novalia Collective and checking a box, but they're going to say no at every corner that they can't do something. They're not willing to actually work with us. The second would be someone who invites us in and lets us sit at the table, but it's a table that already exists. And, they just want us to reinforce maybe the minimal work that they've done to check the box. And then the third type, which is the type that we know is ready to work with us, is the one who's letting us in the room and saying yeah, we had that table, but it's really old. We don't want to use it anymore. We'd like to build something new with you. And those are the ones and we see that by people who have like an investment from their leadership. They're putting resources towards it, so money and time. They're making sure that there is a way that they are actually, they're open to surveying their entire organization to find out like where are people learning levels at, what type of conversations do people want to have. They don't just care about what's happening at the top. So those are some of the things that we see when people are ready, and we hear those when we have conversations with people. We've been doing this for a lot of years now, and the questions that we ask people when we're having that initial meeting is also about like where are they at in terms of the work they want to do, because we never want to do work that is just going to reinforce the status quo. Like Vina and I like live by the values that we say that we live by at Novalia Collective. And so if we say that, we are always going to be putting forth like and upholding like just the value and the voice of marginalized populations, then we need to make sure that we're not working alongside an organization that is going to be stopping us from being able to help them improve. And sometimes there might be one or two people who aren't sold yet, and that's not like a deal breaker. If there's like a lot of great groundswell and grassroots work going on, we want to support those people and help them bring along, leadership and make sure that changes are happening. And so after a few conversations, we typically know where people are at, but it's absolutely important that we are working with partners who want to make real changes and lasting changes.
Yeah, I like that word, lasting changes. That's really true. Because in a work setting, one concern that came up for me was about having those potentially difficult conversations about race. And the reason I say that is because when I use the word emotional labor, sometimes people of color are just tired of hearing the talk and hear the talk about it. So how do you prepare for sessions with your clients about race? And the other question is, because you're dealing with this all day long, probably 24/7. Actually, we don't know that, but I was certain that you go to bed with that on your head. How do you also take care of yourself afterwards when you're dealing in this arena? Because it's a big arena, and just the conversations in itself about race. I know for me, as someone that falls into a BIPOC, person, I'm just like, sometimes it's just like, I don't have the time to try to educate you or help you to understand. People are just tired. So when we talk about that, how do you prepare for those sessions?
I'll start with preparing with the actual organization themselves. We definitely like to walk through what we're going to do, and people need to be on the same page. So we love to give a lot of like pre-reading in different forms, like here's some reading, here's some videos to watch, because like it helps remind people, here are some questions that we're going to discuss. And we always give a survey beforehand. We like to introduce ourselves. Like we don't love to go in blind where people don't know anything about us. We're always going to share something about ourselves, so it feels like a conversation. And those pre-readings and those like pre-materials help people come to the table for the conversation with the same language and the same expectation. And then we always start the sessions with community agreements, because then if something happens, there's a fracture in the conversation, we can go back to the agreements, because we all said at the beginning of the conversation, we were going to agree to this. And we actually give them space to add things to the agreements if we want to. And then we always make sure that we say that, again, we're centering and like uplifting marginalized voices, because if something happens, they need to know that their organization is working with someone who's going to pause and address it, whether it's in the moment or right afterwards. Like they need to know that something won't go unaddressed, because, before starting this company, the places I've worked in the past, I still remember every single moment at those organizations when we had conversations around equity and someone said something extremely problematic and no one stopped. The facilitator didn't stop, the leadership didn't stop. And then I had to say something, and I was put in this position where all that weight was on me. The whole point of having facilitators and people like Vina and myself coming in is that we should be playing that role. Like, yes, we are helping an organization build the ability to have those conversations together, but at the start, like they really need to know that we're in partnership with them. So yeah, I would just say like making sure that leadership, knows what's going to happen in our workshops or our sessions, pre-reading to get people on the same page, priming them with the agreements, and setting the stage that like we are going to be centering the voices of the most marginalized. And if something happens, like we are going to pause and address it.
Yeah. And it's critical. And I too can say that I've shared that same space that you speak of, that you've been in, where someone has said something and it's just glossed over. And I think my first thought was, wow, I'm working with people who are okay with this.
Yes, yes. I will never forget, because sometimes people send you a secret message like, oh, I'm glad you said that. I wanted to say that. I'm like, don't send me secret messages. Either say it out loud or, stand beside me. But, to your point about how how I take care of myself,
Mhm. Yeah.
because I'm in conversations and sometimes I'm in a meeting with the leadership in an organization and they say something that makes me pause and I'm like, oh, okay, do they actually care about Black people? So I'm just like looking around. And that's the great thing about having, a co-founder, we're in meetings usually together. So, one of us can say something and back the other person up. But sometimes I have to step away. I've learned so much from following the Nat Ministry on Instagram and that work on, Twitter, like wherever she's posting, and just taking breaks, stepping back, not letting other people push their timeline on me. If someone says, oh, we have to do this by the end of the year, and I know it needs 5 months, we're going to push for 5 months because, I need to make sure that like I'm resting because I need to rest so I can show up and like take care of myself. And I always want to be modeling the things that I'm telling people. I don't want to tell people to rest and, slow down and not have this false sense of urgency if I'm doing the same thing in my own life. I try to be authentic about the things I'm saying and the things I'm doing. I have my therapist, I have my circle of, friends that I talk to, and I just surround myself with good people and make sure that I take the time to rest.
Mm-hmm. I 150%, 200% agree with you. It's amazing how I've worked with companies where people are talking the talk, but they're not walking. And you see that and you go, well, this is what they say, but their actions are completely different. And that is a really, really key critical point that you made. The other thing is holding your own and recognizing we're not going to get through this in 60 days.
Yeah.
Right? 5 months, that's the, and having your own power and standing in who you are to be able to say, if you really want this work done, we either go the 5 months or we walk away from it. And that's one of the things that I think is important, how companies want to say we're doing this. They want to check a box, right? Not all, but there are some. And the ones that you see that are putting in the work is modeled by their employees, is modeled by their senior staff and, senior leadership. And that's really important as well. So that leads me to this question, Odelia. So when we talk about corporations and or companies and their messaging, there's also something to be said about how companies actually message, and you're looking and say, this isn't a message that's for Black people or people of color. They're catering to a whole nother audience. They're catering to different folks. And I just have often wondered, as I have gotten older and mature, and really take a look back and a step back and say, it's really interesting how companies didn't realize that their messaging, it was not, see, it's that subtlety, those things are subtlety that basically says you're not welcome here.
Yeah.
You're not, you may be smart and have all those talents, but you're not the person I'm looking for. So the question that comes back to, are there common mistakes that you've seen from corporations as you start to work with them that they may need to revamp their messaging as it relates to their employees and senior leadership? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I had a friend the other day who sent me a message, and it was from like senior leadership at her organization, and the whole message read like, I'm about to start an old boys club, and it was just a lot of like signaling to the men in the organization because there were a lot of men in management, but it really isolated the women. And so there's all this messaging that happens where you're trying to do these like confirmation bias or like likeness bias, like, oh, like I'm going to share all these things about myself, which is great. But there's a way that you can share things sometimes, especially if you're leadership, that makes it feel like this is the kind of person who like I'm going to be promoting. This is the kind of person who's on my team. And, that was a big thing in Silicon Valley for a long time. It's like, are you a culture fit? Which is really like, are you just like everyone else here? Instead of like, are you adding something to our culture? Are you pushing our culture? It's like desperately people trying to learn golf to have conversations with people. And so we see it so much in hiring. People are like, well, why aren't we getting other people? I'm like, well, who's on, your website? What's the language on your website? Where are you posting your openings? Because people are astounded when they find out that like the vast majority of jobs are word of mouth. And we also know from research that something like 3 in 4 white people don't have a Black person in their circle. So who are they telling about job openings to? So, it's like we start to see these things about like that close people out, that make it feel like nothing, like I don't have an opening. Why am I even trying? And you also have to have like a real culture that is going to invite those people in as well. Because again, with hiring, if you've had a few people of color and they've had terrible experiences, we're going to tell each other. We always tell each other, like that's something. But the big thing I'm seeing now is companies when they're trying to change, that image of theirs and try to draw people of color in. And it's like, we live in an age in which people are digging back 5-6 years through people's Twitter. We will know what you used to do. So it's astounding that people think they can try and like shift their image without addressing the thing that they've been doing for years.
That blows my mind. I think several months ago, I was actually watching a show on CBS, and there was a gentleman who's actually out of Silicon Valley, and he tells the story of he was hired as an African American recruiter, and he was on a call, and because of COVID, everything they were doing recruiting by way of a Zoom, and he's the head of the HR department. They were playing this rap song using the N-word. And he is going, who is doing this? Who's playing this? And just what we spoke of earlier, nobody spoke up. They acted like it was not a big deal. And he was like, how are you expected to recruit people like playing that? I don't even listen to that. And he was so offended that he ended up quitting, because the next day they sent a Black woman to apologize for all of them for this, what they call, it was just a minor OPA. It was a mistake.
Of course, they sent a Black woman to do. That's why one of my favorite parts of I Love Insecure is that Issa Rae works at that nonprofit We Got Y'all, and it's just like textbook being like one of the only Black people at a nonprofit. Like that part she gets so right.
Yeah. And the reality of it is, what did they do to change the culture? And this company is in the news almost every day. And so how can you draw in people of color with talent if that's still that mentality? And that was the thing that I want everybody around the world, we're international. Listen, you can't expect to hire people of color and you don't understand what you're dealing with. I would rather you say, I don't understand, and where do I need to go to get help? I'll say, call Novalia Collective, let them come in and help you. But the thing is, if you don't know, all right, I can respect that. But when you just gloss over it like it's no big deal, and and all I could think of was for the Black woman that showed up, shame on her. Sometimes we, that's the other piece that we deal with. We stay in a job because we feel like we need the job, and we forget the talent and skills that we bring to that role in that position. So that was, that just, you were talking about that, and that just totally resonated with me. So when we talk about those mistakes that you've seen from the corporate messaging, let's just talk about the whole systemic racism, please. Look, that's huge. Okay, so in your opinion, if we could, you know, in the course of this dialogue, let's talk about that corporate messaging as it affects systemic racism, or makes, in my opinion, probably it just continues to contribute to that, in the racial injustices that we see that actually goes unreported and not discussed, or we just deal with it, give you a check, and you just leave. Right? So, any thoughts around that at all?
Just on the corporate like messaging, yeah, it's like where to start, like everyone's like, oh wow, like especially summer 2020, there's this like big George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and suddenly everyone's like, wow, people are going to hold us accountable, and people made all these statements, whether you're Nike or another organization, like a company, they made these big statements about, Black Lives Matter, and there were like blackouts on Instagram and all this stuff, but no one did two very critical things, which is one, make some realistic goals to actually make changes that were transparent to the organization, and then check in on it a year later. Because I promise you, like 90% of the organizations that made a big splash summer 2020, if we checked in about the real changes they've been making towards that, it would be minimal, because they just didn't actually set like, goals that really matter. The second is they didn't message or do the work around how is the systems of oppression and racism connected to their work specifically. And we see that huge mistake all the time that businesses make. They don't actually bring it back to what do they do, and how is that, pushing forth these like racist practices and ideologies. We were working with a lab, and we're able to talk to the lab about how they do their research, like how they're bringing people in ethically, and like thinking about like the equity and like the history of racism in their specific field. You have to make these things relevant to the work that you're doing, because when we do our work, we think about it at three levels. There's the individual, there's the organization, and the systems level. We always start at the individual level, because individuals need to feel like, they're understanding where they are, and they're growing in their understanding of, how to live in this more equitable spaces of belonging. And then as individuals change, we're collectively changing the organization and thinking about new practices and policies that we're going to put in place, because a lot of this work is unlearning. Like, how do we unlearn these things and replace them with new things? And then the systems level, and the system is like, okay, how do we understand the role that this organization is playing in these larger systems, and how are we pushing back against that? Because no one organization is going to change everything, but it needs to start changing those things, so we start pushing back on the systems. But a lot of people are divorcing these conversations around like race and inclusion and diversity from the actual work that they're doing, which makes it feel like they don't have like actual tangible changes to make in their organization.
Wow, I've got all these things running through my head right now, just listening to you, because one, you're absolutely correct. Number two, what came up for me as you were speaking was this: organizations can work on making changes, but what's the check and balance? Because when these people leave their jobs and they go back to their homes, where a lot of these beliefs are still being bubbled up, and actually people are still doing what they normally do, and it's almost like they're putting on a mask when they come into the company, but nothing is changing underneath there, right? So this is just off the cuff. I'm just thinking about, how does a company even deal with check and balances? Because your home is your private domain, but if there's the hatred speech, the hate talk, because look at what happened when, Black Lives Matter. It was never people saying that all lives didn't matter. But at this particular day and this time, there was a groundswell around people really understanding that Black lives matter just like white lives or Asian lives or Hispanic lives. In this particular case, the wrongful death of George Floyd, and people really miss that. And so they're back home thinking that we matter. I don't need to have a Black Lives Matter. And you talk about the divide that happened, and it just makes me wonder about what's happening in a company, in a corporation, when you see those particular things that you and your organization is going in and trying to work with. And yet, when they walk out the door or they close their laptop, it's business as usual for them. And
Yeah.
you probably see that. I mean, I don't know that for sure, but that just triggered something for me as I'm thinking about that. Wow, what would be those check and balances that an employer really says, we spent the money, we invested in this, and this is what we do. And by the way, I'm certain you will agree with me, more BIPOC people need to see people that look like them in leadership roles, because if at the helm of a company, it's, all white males, or the only people promoted are white females, what is that really saying to the other people who are looking at who do they look up to? And that's always been an issue as well. So,
And to get away from the checking the box, when diversity, equity, inclusion, that kind of work becomes checking boxes, it becomes okay to say, like, we increased our, BIPOC hires by 50% and check a box, instead of saying, like, what is the experience of these hires once they're there? What does their professional learning and development look like? What is the career ladder? Because it's like, all of us are entry level positions, and we're not even at any kind of mid-tier level, let alone at the executive or the C level, then we're not actually having a voice in making changes. And it means that you don't value our voices as just as important. And in some places, even like more important when we're working directly with Black communities. And it's the same with even the work of being a consultant in this space. Is I think that there is something that, Vina and I bring as women of color to this work, and our understanding of like who we represent in a room and our experiences that cannot be replicated by someone else. But, COVID has really blurred the lines between personal and work. And what we're doing at home, our backgrounds, all this stuff, you can see my bookshelf is very much like there's an opening, a door during COVID to all of that. So I very much think people are not just like checking, you can't fully check yourself between work and personal life, and especially not anymore. And so that's why, again, we start with the individual level, because we want people to know that it's beyond just how they show up at work. It's how they show up in their communities and those spaces. And a lot of the creative activities that we do with people, and I say creative because we're both writers and creatives in our life, and we bring that to the work. We make sure that people are not and creativity and like these kind of like imaginings and work that we do with people help break them out of their status quo and the mold that they're usually in. And when we're doing that, we're helping them think about the things that they experience outside the workplace that then come with them into the workplace. As a BIPOC person, I'm not just shutting down everything that happens outside of the work when I come into work. And, anybody else, we're all bringing those things to the workplace. And so we need to understand our lives outside of the workplace and how it influences inside the workplace. So I'm almost like, I'm very frustrated we're still in this pandemic, but there's certain things that the pandemic has blown open, and some of that is this like false divide between work and home.
Wow. Yes. Look, let me put a stamp on that, because that's absolutely correct. And I'm loving having this dialogue and conversation. We'll definitely have to have you come back and we talk more about that, because it's real. And I know with different generations, some of the things that I've gone through and my experiences are very different from, the Gen Xers and the Zs and all of this, because they're thinking that this doesn't exist, but it absolutely does exist. And when you look at why you left a company or organization, 99 times out of 100, it was number one, you talked about no one had a roadmap. How do you get to the next level? No one had a mentor. Oh, so I've got to get promoted to a VP level before I get a mentor. That doesn't make sense, right? And then there was no one like me that I could assimilate with. It didn't happen. And one thing that you said earlier on in the conversation, you talked about those people in corporate America who had to go out, and I was one of those. You need to learn to play golf so that you can connect, with the senior management if you play golf. I don't play golf. What did I care about golf? Right? So hearing those things and having this dialogue, y'all, this is some really, really good stuff that you're getting from my guest, Miss Odelia Young. Please, 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 we've got to be sure and connect with her. So, Adelia, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, I'm going to shift gears and we're going to talk about how COVID, because you kind of led into how COVID has changed a lot of things, but how has COVID changed how your company does business? So, you guys, again, if you have questions, place them in the comment section, but we'll be right back. So, don't go away. I'm here with the co-founder of Novalia Collective, Miss Odelia Young. We'll be right back.
You told me not to talk to strangers. You told me not to cross the street without looking both ways.
You told me not to touch the stove.
You told me not to do drugs.
You told me not to drink and drive.
You gave me so many messages about how to stay safe. Why didn't you keep me safe by properly storing your gun?
Let's get back to talking smack with the side of mac and cheese.
Before we can safely come together, we need the facts on COVID-19 vaccines.
To get the facts, visit getvaccineanswers.org so you can make an informed decision when vaccines are available to you.
Thank you for watching the You Didn't Get the Memo show with your inspirational host, Gloria Bailey Ray. It's your contributions that make this happen. To become a sponsor, send an email to youdidn'tgetthememo@gmail.com. That's the letter U, didn't get the memo. If you're not in a space to be a sponsor, but you like what you hear, we simply ask that you support what you like by making a contribution to the show. There are 3 ways to make an online donation. Visit paypal.me/Gloria Bailey Ray or Cash App or Venmo, Gloria Bailey Ray. Give what you can. Your support is appreciated.
All right. Thank you guys for hanging in there. I have been talking with my awesome guest, Miss Odelia Young of Novalia Collective. This woman is just dope. I'm just telling you, it's real. It's riveting to hear the conversations. I could go on and on. We just have to have, this is one of those where we have to continue this over dinner. Okay. Definitely. And the things that you're sharing with us about what your company does, I'm loving it more and more. So before we went to break, one of the questions that I asked was, how has your company had to change due to COVID, as it relates to doing business?
Yeah, so everything moved to virtual. We had previously been meeting people in person for retreats, and there's something about like meeting someone in person and that instant connection. So we shifted a lot of stuff virtual. One of the biggest things and the first things we shifted virtual was we have a program called This Is My Body, which hopefully I'll get to talk a little bit more about later. And it's usually in person, and we work with women of color to develop 5-minute one-woman shows. And we were like, wow, we don't want to not do it. So we shifted it to virtual. And it was the first time we realized that the shifts to virtual in COVID we're not going to be all terrible. We actually were able to open up the application to women across the entire US, and some of them joined from outside the US for the program. And that was just like, wow, like, yeah, we're not doing it local, but like we're hearing from voices from all across the US. Like that was incredible. And we've really enjoyed being able to play around with our own creativity and style with our virtual presentations, different mediums to get people excited. We love giving people multiple ways to engage, whether it's whole group, small group, little Padlets, drawing, activity, all these different things. Virtual actually opened up a greater world for us of those tools to use. And we found that some people who may have sat back a little bit when we were in person were able to, some of these newer mediums, talk a little bit more and share their thoughts. And that was just really incredible. So we've been leaning into these changes and how they've actually been able to help us reach more people and engage people in new and exciting ways.
Yeah. And yeah, there's a positive upside as it relates to what happened with COVID. Things weren't all bad as it relates to from the business perspective. And people are like, oh, I hated this. But you're absolutely right. People felt a sense of comfort and safety if you were doing things virtual. So that's the difference. But what about the type of workshops that your company provides to clients? I don't want you to give away the candy store, but can you talk about a couple of those workshops and what they may look like?
Yeah, we do one workshop around, just like understanding belonging. There's been some great work done from the Othering and Belonging Institute out of Berkeley, and we are really inspired by that work to help people understand the process of belonging and othering and how that relates to having healthy communities and organizations and companies, and helping people do that through kind of designing their own communities and what that looks like. And so that's one we really love. We do some on facilitating difficult conversations, so helping people practice what kind of styles they would like to use with people and what styles they'd like people to use with them, and thinking about how we have conversations and not being scared of conflict as a bad thing, but conflict as like a natural like state of being when we're going through some really big changes. We do, lots of workshops too on helping people understand radical imagination and come up with their visions for their organizations around that. Those are a couple that are really popular right now. And then also some, like I said, we've been working with a lot of people around hiring, and then also how they put an equity lens to their projects as well.
Yeah, I always like that word, equity lens, definitely. So what about workplace of the future? COVID has changed how companies are doing work. So let's talk about, in your opinion, what does the workplace of the future look like as it relates to remote from home, hybrid, which is a home and office, or in an office full time? So what are your thoughts around this workplace of the future?
Yeah, this is a really critical moment for organizations and companies to say, like, yeah, we'd like to meet you in the future. What does that look like? It looks like giving your workers and like more choice. In terms of like so many people demanding people be in office, where not everyone needs to be in office, but some people like going into the office. So I really think these like hybrid models are going to be really popular and necessary. And there's going to be some hard questions to answer with that. Like, how do you make sure that the people who aren't seeing each other in person still feel included? How are you still bringing the whole organization together? How are you making sure that people who are working from home and the office still have the same access to supplies and connection points as well? And I think the reason why some people aren't leaning more into virtual and hybrid is because they don't want to answer those questions. And again, we have to we want to be here in the future, and we need to attract people because, millennials, especially younger millennials and Gen Z, they want to work at a place that values them. Yes, they want to make, a living wage, but they want to be at a place where they're telling a good story, getting back to that storytelling piece. Like, can I tell this next story, this next chapter of my life with you? Are you going to care about helping me write it? Like, what are we doing together? And that's going to drive people. Everyone's worried about, like, are people really working? Can we trust people? And it's like, there's always going to be the handful of people that take advantage of a policy. But the vast majority of people, if they feel like they are thriving and they are valued in a space, like they're still going to do that work because they're driven by the work and they're driven by the people that they're working with. And they just want to know that they have that flexibility, and that's just really necessary. So we've been trying to do some work. We held a panel a couple of months ago around, what does the future of work look like and how do we have equitable designs for that? And it starts with listening, having forums to hear from your employees about what they need and what they would like. A lot of people surveyed people, maybe April 2020 and never surveyed their staff ever again. It's like who I was April 2020 is not who I am November 2021. We've learned so much about ourselves in the last, year plus of this pandemic. And a lot of that relates to how we work and what works for us in a workplace. And we need to continually be surveying people to understand how these dynamics have changed and how, going into this next phase of the, pandemic and work, like how are we building that workplace of the future? Not even just this interim workplace. We need to be building for the thing that people are going to be needing, because COVID's really picked up the pace on a lot of innovations. And in many ways, like we need to lean into that and just, keep going. We jumped ahead like a decade.
Right. Absolutely. But the one thing that I love is if companies offer that, you're absolutely right. Some people need to feel, especially younger generation, I need to know that I'm valued. I need to know that my ideas, people have heard them and that they've been talked about and, they are in the boardroom and people are really looking at this. But on the other hand, for some organizations where it was, as an adult, you're right. Now, some people will take advantage. I don't care where you are, whether you're in an office all day or not, you're going to have that. But for the most part, what I found, and for me, my thing is, it doesn't matter if you can only get your work done between 10 p.m. and 3 a.m. I don't care if the work is done, right? But it allows that person to have that time with their family. And that opened up a whole nother box. And on the other hand, there were people who said, I realize I don't like being at home with my kids. And, I'm not quite for sure if I really even like kids, right? Because they didn't have to deal with it for that 10, 12-hour block of time. So COVID has opened up an awful lot of different things in that regard. So thank you for talking about that. So let me just ask you this. How do you determine once a plan is implemented, if it's effective or not?
Yeah, we always set those measures at the start. So, whatever we're doing, there's going to be some kind of measure. So, if we're giving a survey at the beginning to kind of see what the baseline is and how people are feeling about, let's say, decision making and trust at their organization, then we, that might be our baseline measure, and we might check it again in like a year with an organization. People want to check in a couple months, but these things really take time for people to feel differently about. So maybe every 6 months or a year, checking against that baseline, having focus groups. So there's kind of like the formal ways, like the surveys, focus groups that we might collect some measurements. But there's also informal ways too. Like what are people saying differently? Like what are people hearing when they go about that people are talking about in terms of that? And then, for us, there's the measures that we work with the organization. And then we like to, work with them to think about how they're going to sustain measuring their impact. And not everything can be measured too. That's why I mentioned the informal channels to think about how you're having that impact as well. We, think about our own measures for is Navalia Collective doing the things that we want to do? We like to check in on the people that we worked with before. We want to hear from, people of color at the organizations and, how they felt about the engagement. So, we're also measuring our own levels of success in terms of are we meeting our vision and mission that we've set forth for ourselves.
Yeah. One question, do you see corporate America as changing its attitude as a misogynist? Someone who is they're basically strongly prejudiced against women. Do you see that changing? Because I'm still looking for, there still are not enough women or women-owned organizations, although they're the fastest group of businesses that are growing. But I'm thinking of that more as relates to the BIPOC community. Do you see corporate America changing its attitude as those white males who are, I should say, dominant white males who are in those roles and heading up and leading companies? Do you see that changing at all?
I mean, when we know that the number one thing you could look at right now about the state of affairs is how much fighting there is right now over paid family leave.
Yeah.
And if it was just men who had to stay home with the kids, we would have had that 5 million years ago. But it has to change, and especially talking about BIPOC, women, and I'm speaking primarily about like Black women also. Like we are getting graduate degrees and these advanced degrees outpacing many other groups. We are some of the fastest people to start businesses and be business owners, that we're not getting venture capitalist funding. We're not always getting the loans that we need to, and people are missing out on incredible products and incredible ideas because we're not being given those chances. So I love that I'm seeing like a little bit of that push and some more of these like money coming up. And it's great that there's a lot of programs for mentorship for us as business leaders and advancing in our careers, but sometimes we just need the capital. And I'm hoping that corporate America, whether it's like giving the raises or providing some of the funding opportunities that some of these larger companies are doing, that we will be able to do that more. But there's some great people working on that. We just got to support the work, but I don't know when it will all change, but it has to change. You cannot box out 50% of a population. That just doesn't work.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the way you put that. If men had to stay at home, some of these things would, and we probably wouldn't be having the whole issue around abortions, right? If men had to have children. So it's interesting how the imbalance is there. But let's talk about this is my body. What is that? And then TN transition, I was intrigued by that. So let's start with talking about this is my body.
Yeah, this is my body, just so much joy. You can probably see it on my face already. So it's our flagship program. We did our first year in 2019, this is our 2018, I think, of This Is My Body. So This Is My Body is a storytelling program for women of color. And so we take a cohort of women of color, and through writing and performance workshops, we help them develop an original 5-minute one-woman show. And this was kind of birthed because we're like, wouldn't it be great if we did one-woman shows? And then we're like, nah, scratch that. We want to help other people develop one-woman shows. And then we're like, that could feel overwhelming for people. Why don't we do 5 minutes? And then I thought of the theme of body because just, the picking at who we are as women and our bodies happened so many years, ago. Like it starts when we're so young. And so we get to this age, whether we're in our 20s, 30s, 40s, beyond. And there are these stories of our body that we don't own anymore. Like someone has made it into something that we didn't want it to be. So This Is My Body is about how do we reclaim those narratives and tell this story about our bodies to reclaim it. And women have talked about abortion. They've talked about open heart surgery, being asexual. They've talked about the gamut of things in the 4 years that we've had the program. And our second year was actually turned into a book by Nomadic Press. So you can read the stories and you can scan the QR code to watch it live. And just every year I see how much the women grow together as a community. And I also see how much, it impacts us. Cause I just, every year that I'm just helping people birth a story, it makes me just that's the proudest I am of myself. It's the happiest I am is when I help other people birth these stories. And it is a powerful experience for the women because we tell them first and foremost, you are telling the story for you. If someone in the audience gravitates towards it, that's great. But this is about you being able to reclaim a narrative. And the audience just has really, really loved it every year. We've had people who've been to every single year. And just, real quick, TN Transitions came out of a workshop we had helping people think through their different transitions in their life. So we wanted to have, we're millennials. We're like, let's start a podcast. So the podcast is about the stories of women of color. And we also talk about a tea for the day. It's about, the dynamic lives of women and tea. So we might have an episode that's like Big Red Rogue Oolong and Rinks. So, Vina's really great at making tea blends, and we'll taste those and talk about the tasting notes. And then we'll use those tasting notes and like weave it into listening to some pre-recorded stories from women of color. And then we interview them as well. And yeah, watch out for season 2. You can listen to season 1 now on our website.
Oh, okay, awesome. And that website is what?
www.navaliacollective.com.
Okay.
And you can also find the podcast on all the major podcast carriers.
Okay, awesome. So, Adelia, this has been just so inspiring that I hate to let you go, but I want to ask you, what do you want people watching the show today? What do you want them to take away?
That we can imagine things differently, whether it's just, sharing a story between two people or deeply imagining our communities and our organizations differently. And there are people ready to partner with you to do that work. And, we are deeply, invested in this work. So if you want to do it, please connect with us. But wherever you are, whatever you're doing, just keep going. There are people who are behind you.
Okay, well, you don't go anywhere. I'll be right back. I want to say to my guests, I want to first of all thank Miss Odelia Young of Novalia Collective for being on the show today. Riveting. If you guys just kind of tuning in, I see some of you are, go back and watch the entire show. Her information is just, oh my goodness, it's left me inspired. I'm like, okay, what else can I do? A gentle reminder and ask is to remember to support our efforts by inquiring about our sponsorship packages. Or if you're not in the space to be a sponsor, you might just want to become a supporter. And so any donation of any amount, there is a blessing in the giving. Be sure and follow me on all of my social media sites. I'm everywhere. And again, mark your calendar for every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Pacific time, for the You Didn't Get the Memo show. If you're in need of some midweek inspiration, be sure and tune into my podcast, Real Talk with Lady G, every Thursday at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on Spreaker.com. Quick shout out to all my viewers, both international and national. I want to thank you guys so much for tuning in. A huge thank you again to my donors and my sponsors. Thank you for your support. As I always say, if you didn't take anything away from today's show, then it's really you who didn't get the memo. Hey, remember this. Until this time next week, have a great week. Give thanks for all of your blessings. Stay safe and remember to pay it forward. The quality of your life is determined by the decisions that you made. I'm Gloria Bailey Ray, your host. Peace and blessing all.